Good evening. I'm Guillermo de Cervantes of the Kingdom of Trimaris. I hail from the Shire of South Keep. And with us this evening to guide us on our learning curve of melee is Jarl Ari Tyrbrandr. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about where you come from and your experience in the SCA?
Okay, I hail from Trimaris. I was started fighting in the SCA in 2000-ish, 2001. Um, Background prior military. I did Civil War reenacting as a kid. So battlefield command and structure has been a part of my life for the majority of it. Of course, with the SCA, we really get to explore that because we get to actually practice what we've been studying. One of my dream jobs in the SCA that I had sought out being was a Kingdom Warlord, which I stood for Trimaris for 4 years, which that was a fantastic job, but overall, very satisfying for me personally because that's where my mind's always been. I'm definitely a war dog. I wasn't born on the list field. I was born on the battlefield. You hear that many times in the SCA, but I really do enjoy my melees and have taken quite a bit of time to do some studying. So with that being said, I've been going to Gulf Wars, Penzix, War of the Wings, Castle Wars throughout this whole time. I haven't missed a Gulf Wars in over 20 years. So a little bit about myself.
Well, our focus today is about training and preparation for melee so that when we go to war that we have the battle skills as soldiers to be able to hold discipline. We have a lot of young people here that are wanting to know how to prepare. What are some things that you would share initially for as a leader and about strategy and tactics?
Well, some of the baseline philosophies when you're talking to individual commanders, we've got our own different way of doing things. And, you can have all the prowess on the field that you want, but it's going to be your command strategy and tactics that you implement that's going to make you a valuable leader. And the difference, one of the things I wanted to cover is the difference between strategies and tactics. A lot of people get confused on the actual practical applications of these two words, specifically strategies and tactics. Strategies, that's what your command structure goes into the battle looking to achieve. But it's not necessarily just victory. Like your strategy could be, we want to play a defensive strategy, make our opponents come to us. That is a strategy. The tactics would be okay, we're going to use these specific units and these specific formations in these specific locations to achieve that strategy. So this is one of the things I kind of wanted to cover. We kind of touch two different things on battlefield. There's a lot of military presence and organization on a battlefield, even in the SCA. Is discipline and regimentation are two other things that I like to refer to. Discipline, bluntly, is doing what you're told when you're told. Doing what you're supposed to be doing when you're supposed to be doing it. The difference between that and regimentation is being able to be disciplined without instruction to continue doing the right thing and change dynamically, even without instruction. So a lot of units may be very disciplined, say, hey guys, I need you to hold square A on the battlefield. They may go and hold square A all day long, but if square A is uncontested and the bodies could be better utilized somewhere else, they may not move and go to those other objectives without being given the command to do so from the higher echelons. So that's where regimentation comes in. It's being able to actually go at your mid-level command structure and go, okay, are we still doing the right thing? Are we adapting? And brings up my third note I wanted to bring up. There's a trope that happens very regularly on the battlefield, and no best laid plan survives first contact, which stands to reason. But I like to fight against that, because if we're achieving regimentation as units properly, then we can adapt and change after first contact. And usually that's what wins battles, is the ability for your sergeant, your squad level command, and your unit level commanders, not necessarily your upper echelon commanders, being able to adapt quickly to their environment to change the outcome of the entire battle. So for me, that component right there is where most battles are won. And with my experience in the SEA, it absolutely rings true. So I just kind of wanted to cover those few points so that some of my baseline philosophies as we get started.
So it sounds like discipline is basically the what holds a soldier. He will follow commands and stick to his orders. Regimentation comes from experience to be able to make command decisions in a moment.
Well, it's not just experience. One of the core things that I've learned over the years, as far as your baseline soldier, I mean, Tim, you're just getting started, but one of the things that you can do to be regimented early on is knowing the plan, more so than just, hey, I'm going to set between my two squire brothers and this shield wall, and we're going to keep each other alive. We're going to move where we're told to move. That's good discipline. Regimentation brings that squad leader to you, and he goes, okay, we're going to go and we're going to contact this unit. If we get through this unit, I need X accomplished or Y accomplished. You have the overall game plan throughout your unit, so that even when your command structure dies off, the unit itself can demonstrate that regimentation and accomplish the mission without its leadership. And oftentimes that's basically you understanding that you've got that permission to open your mouth. You see an incoming threat, let your command staff know. If you don't have command staff, guess what? You're in charge. Be regimented and do what needs to be done when it needs to be done.
How does situational awareness feed into this?
It's massive. Everywhere from your squad level commanders, in my opinion, are your more veteran, I'd say 2 to 3 war. You are able to command a squad, which is up to 8 people. SCA, that's usually 3 to 5 people for a good squad. Your squad leaders are in the ranks. They're not necessarily going to have heads on swivel. They're going to be behind either war shields or in front lines or occupied with their unit they're running with. Yes, situational awareness and being able to look around the battlefield is important. Right about that level is where that kind of begins and ends. Is when you get to your unit level commander, which is going to be in your backfield. You don't want a unit level commander out in front of your ranks or in your front or second ranks. They need to be back so they can observe and pass down commands as necessary. So that's really where your situational awareness on the battlefield starts to become super crucial. Tim, you had a question?
Yeah, is it easy to identify the enemy's unit command, like if they are behind the line, so you have a target of where you want to go?
It can be. It really depends on your experience. I mean, if you see somebody pointing and giving loud commands and speaking very loudly, then they might be in charge. And that's usually a dead giveaway for you to stick some archers on them. But realistically, you can't really avoid that, because one of the more important features of being a unit squad level command and higher is the ability to communicate with everyone. We're wearing helmets. There's a lot of stuff going on. Shafts are rattling past your helmet. There's no telling. Being able to project your voice on the battlefield, and as you probably learned in the weeks past, and I know you did specifically in your training a couple of weeks ago, echoing the commands, your unit knowing to repeat the command down the line so that everyone can actually hear it. It doesn't matter if the enemy can hear what we're about to do or not. Usually by the time we're giving the preparatory command to do something, it's too late. That ball's already going in that direction. So there's no stopping it at that point. So yeah, somebody in the field, it's usually going to be a knight, not necessarily the case. In being able to identify them is going to be based on how they're communicating. So yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If you do break the line and get to and take them out, are they still allowed to voice commands once they're down, or do you have to? Is that like a rule that you have to stop giving?
No, a couple of the rules in the SCA is when you're dead, you're dead. You don't get to command. You don't get to give indications of anything. You remove yourself from the field, and once you're off the field, you still can't. Not supposed to be giving commands. It also holds true with holds. When the battle stops for safety reasons or whatever, we are not supposed to be discussing tactics at any level. We're just supposed to stand there or kneel silently until the hold is over. So giving people the indication of, hey, there's a unit about to hit us on the right flank now that we've had a moment to breathe and actually look around when we're not, having shots thrown at us. That's when a lot of the tactics fall apart in the SCA, is when the holds are called. So you do very rarely see tactics adjusted because of the holds. Can we avoid it? No, we can't. But what we can do is do the right thing and not preemptively give those commands before the lay on and while we're still at the hold.
I want to go back to the communication. From a unit commander to the sergeant to the frontline fighter. What is the nuts and bolts of how that communication is made?
So from the unit commander side of it, hopefully your unit commander or representative attended a command meeting, especially at some of your larger scale wars where you've got multiple kingdoms involved. Even if it's as simple as a command structure huddle at the beginning of a fight to kind of readdress, you're going to get your overall commander, whoever's in charge of the entire army, the individual unit commanders, and maybe a couple of squad leaders at that gathering. They're going to basically disperse that information amongst the units verbally. If it's a small battle like our panhandle skirmishes where it's only two kingdoms just fighting against each other, then that'll happen very quickly on the battlefield, which can be a little tense and take a little time in between battles if you do it properly. And the marshals are aware that it's happening and are actually waiting for the command staff to give the, okay, we're ready to go now. Versus your larger scale battles where you've got multiple kingdoms. We actually schedule command meetings where, hey, you show up at this encampment and we've got, dry erase boards and we've got the manual in our hands for the war that tells us, the parameters and all the things for each battle so that we can break them all down and then disseminate it out to the general populace.
In our second session, we talked a lot about the steps that precede war and preparation and the decisions and the treaties that are made so that we know what are the parameters of each battle ahead of time. And that was fascinating. But this is a question asked last month. As a young marshal, new marshal, not young, as a new marshal, I want to train my new fighters in melee. How should we start?
Nope. First things first is get the training regiment, the war manuals, how your kingdom likes to operate, having that information so that your command structure can be on the same page on how you issue commands, so that I don't use a specific command with my unit that your unit is not going to understand. Even though we're in the same kingdom, by the time first contact happens and unit breakdown starts happening and we start regrouping as we should, so that our commanders and sub-commanders communicate with the lowest level person and we're all speaking the same language is really the first most important part of that. That's where you're going to get that discipline in teaching your units and your command staff exactly what you're looking for there. At that point, once you've got that information in hand, it's practicing it. It's showing up. One of the drills I like to do with first timers, once you've got the basic commands down, you know how to turn right, you know how to turn left, you know how to walk, you know how to get the unit moving, is to give everyone in that unit, no matter how new they are, how old they are, in the SCA, the opportunity to actually guide and control the line. I call it taking a unit for a walk or taking them for a test drive. Actually give every single person the opportunity to use the commands and walk the unit around just like it's their unit. That really helps instill the process of giving a preparatory command and an execution command, what commands are being used, and really help solidify that knowledge in their head, so that even when they step back out of that role for the real situation, they've got a better knowledge and understanding of what they're hearing and how to react to it.
So that we're all using the same language, no matter where we are coming at it from across the kingdom. So running drills like wheel left, wheel right, moving forward, moving at angles, shifting left, shifting right, serpentine columns. What about maneuvers? Like last month, we were talking a lot about wing attacks to do flanking. What are some maneuvers, common maneuvers that they should know?
Well, just like your wings, basically when you're looking at a larger unit, when I say larger, when you're looking at 10 to 12 plus in a unit, and this can go all the way up to 200 or however many's in an army, being able to practice it at a full walk. What I generally recommend is start it with helmets off. You get your weapon and get your shield, line up your ranks, and go through the motions with command structure, giving the commands, and then having individual units. Now, of course, if you've got a war practice with more than 20 people at it, it may become tedious actually having everybody take a turn in the saddle. I get that. Get your senior guys used to it. Whatever time constraints you have, work with that. In the future, yes, keep practicing, and yes, even get the newest people running that unit in large scale, doing your wheel rights, your wheel lefts, and breaking up into separate units and practicing your wings and your flanks, even if it's just walkthroughs with your helmets off. Then you graduate. Once your unit and everybody that you're training with traditionally and regularly starts getting to the point where, okay, we know how to walk now, and everybody knows how to walk, then put your helmets on and start walking through each other, not necessarily engaging. One of the fun things I love to do is, most people don't realize when you're doing walkthrough drills that you're going to literally be pushing other people out of the way when you're that front shield wall. So having an instructor or another unit physically standing there, and you have to push your way through them and then reform and dress your lines after you've pushed through that unit, these are going to start developing those skills of that reformation and keep your units together. Realizing that the ground's going to be littered with arrows and spear shafts and bodies. One of the things I also like to do is I'll grab an extra player or an instructor and put them on the ground under a war shield right in the way of the unit. Make them walk over them. Learning how to do a shuffle step, this is a tactic, but a shuffle step versus a high step behind a war shield, because you can't see what's going on under your feet and when to use these kinds of steps and how to use them. That's where you're going to start implementing not just commanding the unit to move, but how to move and keep moving under obstruction. So again, as you progress as a unit, you get through the point where, okay, we've got our hats on, because it gets a little rough when you're walking through people and you're accidentally going to get smacked. Then you start doing walkthroughs with instructors. Instructors will take spears, or even archers. Combat archers it's a lots of fun. You'll walk your unit under duress. You don't get to attack. You get to walk and defend yourself while people poke at you in the face and test your line integrity and shoot at you from different angles. And you gradually build your unit up to the point to where you're actually moving and fighting at full speed. And you move to the point where you got a full shield wall, start adding in your pole support. They need to learn how to brace their walls, defend their shield with their pole arms, all these things and actually be the eyes and ears for the unit, which is what your second and third rank support should be for your primary shield wall. They're the ones with their heads on the swivels. That's where the rest of your command staff is. And as you go in your training regiment, and this could be over months to get to the point where you're actually pushing that same group you're training with to that level. It doesn't have to go, you don't start flying right off the bat. Crawl, walk, run. So you build up your training regiment with your local group in this manner. And if you do have, a knight or a senior squire there to kind of help guide you in the when you should be progressing to the next phase of your training at your local practices, or even a designated, melee practice, that's going to be even better because they're going to give you a true read. I know one of the biggest hindrances for the SAA is nobody wants to train. It's boring. I hate walking. And, walking in a shield wall, it can be tedious, sure. But that's where you're gaining that discipline so that when you actually get on the battlefield, unit commanders can start executing actual tactics instead of just, I know these units match up with each other, so I'm going to send this unit that way and this unit that way and hope for the best, which sadly is the majority of the tactical abilities in the SEA at this point, because most of our local units and fighters don't train melee. And even our National Guard actively, they train at least once a month and 2 weeks out of the middle of the year.
Can you talk a little bit about what the wing maneuver is?
Well, basically wings are a supplemental unit for me, a wing is, you've got your mainline unit, as you see the wing on the screen here. Your mainline unit isn't pictured in that. This wing is got all its shields on one side or the other, left wing or right wing. And they're basically what I would call a skirmishing unit. These units have designations to do the extra things, like prevent a flank, or perhaps get out in front of the main line and roll a flank. They're going to be lighter shields than your war shields, so that they're going to be more maneuverable. And some of them, wing units, can be specialized for specialized goals for a particular battle. Like, hey, we need you to go into the backfield and chase down archers and take out all their artillery in the backfield. So you're going to want more shields because they're going to have to be running into fire, so on and so forth. So you can specialize your wing units for specific tasks. And, even if it's just, hey, if we get flanked, you're going to eat that. You're going to be that punch force that hits that flank. It can be as much as, hey, this wing unit, we just, blew through a gap in the center of a line. We can send a wing unit in as a column charge into one of those exposed, center holes that we've blown into another unit, and they can get into the backfield and run amok and basically destroy the guts of a unit in an instant if they're set up and prepared to do these things. But your wings really shouldn't be more than 10 people at max. Usually a 5 to 6 person wing is a solid, small enough squad that can basically be in direct response to your unit commander, so they can be deployed as a unit commander see fit.
Looks like we have a few questions. Halfton, you got your hand up?
Yes. So would the wing be the unit that you would send in any of our objective-based scenarios, like a town battle, to go take and keep an objective, or would you use a different unit for that?
Well, in theory, it could be a wing unit to do that. If you're actually setting up a wing, I mean, it could be a wing, it could be a column charge, really depends on the scenario. And that's kind of why I'm stammering on that. You could specialize a wing to do a specific task, like, hey, we're going to open up the end of the earth side of this line. Our main unit isn't actually going to run into the backfield and capture this hut. We're going to send a wing unit to go do that. And we're going to send y'all in so y'all can blow in real quick because they're understaffed and we have this opportunity. So yes, a wing unit could be utilized for that as well, which essentially is just a flank right, or really depends on what your scenario is. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Tim, did you have a question? I see your hand up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had my hand up earlier, but I got a question. How far away, like, would the archers be in a typical line?
Really depends on your scenario again. There are all kinds of scenarios, field battles, ravines, fort battles, town battles, and a mother of all battles, which is kind of all of them combined, are the traditional scenarios that's run at Gulf Wars. Penzic runs field battles, woods battles, fort battles, occasionally valleys, town scenarios. So it really is a wide gambit, and tactically, they would be deployed best for that scenario. So
As a combat archer, I'll say that you can have an archer right underneath the line shooting over the shoulder of the shield wall.
yeah, the rules for archers basically is they can shoot you as close as they can get to you, as long as their bolt or arrow can clear their bow or crossbow. So you can be point blank and shoot somebody by our rule set. Whether that's the smartest way to do it or not really depends on your situation.
So they're kind of like a primary target to take out. Then, is there any kind of like, what would you call a maneuver that is specifically designed to go for their archer group?
Other archers.
Sorry, you broke up, Guy.
Other archers.
Yeah, the first thing we usually do is we give our archers a hierarchy of kill targets, and that starts with other archers. Secondly, from there is command staff, if you can identify them, and kind of on that same level is your spears are going to be doing the majority of the killing on most of your SCA battlefields. You can train someone and get them authorized and come through their first war, give them a bucket of 80 crossbow bolts, and they can murder 80 dukes with spears with the proper training and communication. So they're absolutely deadly, and the proper guidance of them is just that important. It can change a battlefield.
Is there any equivalent to like a cavalry for the foot soldiers?
Not necessarily. The best equivalent you're going to get is setting up a specialized wing unit. A light infantry is the best we can do. I don't like calling any of foot soldiers cavalry, because they're just not.
Right.
They're really skirmishers, or harriers as they're commonly referred to as well. But yeah, very regularly you'll see in the beginning of like bridge battles or scenarios where there's an objective that you have to reach and hold and it's timed, you'll see lightweight units sprinting across the battlefield to get to that objective first, so they can start to count clock or gain more territory, just so they can establish a better foothold for the rest of their unit that's moving slowly. So yeah, there are uses for lighter shielded lightweight infantry in SCA combat.
Thank you.
We have on the screen a list of commands. Do you want to discuss any of these?
Yeah, these are basically just some of the baseline commands that everyone should know. We kind of talked earlier on that. Let's all speak the same vocabulary so that when we get on the field, this is kind of the standard for Trimarian command, basically put together by Shosai, myself, Shosai, who joined us a little bit earlier, but so that you have simply dress the line, dress all your functions. When you're full shield wall, you dress to the right, because when most of your shieldmen are righties, and if you're behind a shield, you're not necessarily walking forward facing, but kind of kitted to the right a little bit, because your shield tables. So you turn your shoulder into it and you kind of walk at an oblique normally if you're walking forward, because now your shield's forward. So your visibility is better to the right than it is to look back over your shoulder to the left. So the most functional way to dress a line with shield is to dress to the right. The person on the right sets the pace of the line. They guide their pace off the person on the far left, which we call the driver. So the primus is what I designate as the person on the right end of the line. They're usually a squad leader level, such as your driver is as well. So you dress to the right because it's just easier to dress to the right. It's more functional. Dressing left is a little more difficult. You do that when you're doing left maneuvers. So like a wheel left or a shift left on the move. So any left command, you dress left, and you end up doing that by feel, because you almost have to feel the presence of the person shield to shield on your shield or shoulder to shoulder as you're turning, and you can't really see that you're going that direction, but you can feel the person next to you. And your backfield support will help you dress your line and keep that unit integrity while you're doing left maneuvers.
When you say dress the line, does that mean when you're overlapping the shield?
It really depends. There is an overlap that's desired when you're doing a closed formation, which is generally your shield in front of the shield, the back of the shield of the person in front of you, so that you're capping theirs. The reason for this is you've got a handle right there. So if any spearmen hook their shield and try to pull it out to open a gap up, you are using your shield to keep their shield from being pulled open. And you can also use your elbow on the backside of your buddy's shield that's to your right to keep them from being pushed open so that you're exposed. So that's a closed rank position for shields that's preferred. You can have an open rank where the shields are just touching each other and not actually overlapping. When you're dressing that way, still dressing to the right because that's where your visibility is. And then there's an even further open rank where you've got legitimate gaps, if not a person-sized gap in your rank. So you're really just having to use your eyes and your backfield support, your spearmen and your polemen, to help make sure you've got good line integrity for those situations. So yeah, a dress line is generally a straight line. The cup of death, just go back up just a little bit. In a situation like this, the line is actually a cup. Dressing the line, you're looking for the same principles for dressing the line for shield overlap in like this situation, but you're also looking for minor gaps where spears can get through. Somebody's not quite lining their shields are just right, and your backfield is going to be able to see that and communicate to you. It's like, hey, you need to shift your shield this way, that way. So dressing the line when that command is given is basically, hey, we've got a minute to breathe. Let's get all our little holes zipped up so it makes it harder to touch us so that we can start moving forward again or doing whatever mission we need to execute.
Where do lefties fit into this?
I think I'm a rebel. Lefties, very regularly, you'll see lefties on the left end of the line. The reason a lot of units put them on the left end of the line is because they can throw wraps around the left side of their shield. It gives an advantage to that left end, whereas when you're throwing your wraps around the right, the person across from you is generally either not a lefty. If they're a righty, their sword's on the wrong side to defend themselves. So if you're pressed shield to shield and they're tabled up against each other, that righty on that right end has the advantage. So putting a lefty on that end takes that advantage away. However, where I tend to be a little bit different on this, that's all fine and good, but a lefty can't dress to the right because they're facing left. So for them to be your pivot point and your guide point for other maneuvers when they can't face right, diminishes their ability to dress the line. So they will be out of step, they'll be out of formation, their shield overlap won't be right. There's a lot of functional parts of having a lefty on the left end of the line that just doesn't jive with all the other functions other than literally being belly to belly with another unit. So that's really the only advantage to having a lefty on the left end. Whereas, my opinion, if you're forming a wedge, you put your lefties on the right side of the line and your righties on the left side of the line, because your Primus at that point is the point man in the middle. So everybody's guiding off that point. So if all your lefties are on the right part of the line, they're looking left and guiding left, and your righties are on the left guiding right. So everybody's guiding to that center person properly. I'm also a fan of putting your lefty just to the right of your Primus so that they can guide that same direction on a full wall. So again, that may not be the most popular opinion amongst a lot of SCA command staff and unit building structure. That's just my personal take on it. Because I think, I mean, my whole purpose of it is the function of the lefty being able to dress a line and move properly and more easily makes that unit more efficient than just having one good person in the right spot at a very minute point in time. So that's just my 2 cents on lefties.
Tim, your hand's still raised. Did you have another question?
No, I didn't know that it was raised, but I mean, I pretty much always got questions.
That's why we keep calling on you. You gotta take your hand down.
Well, so I noticed that like the shield doesn't cover your full body, like your feet are exposed and like your head is kind of, you know what I'm saying? So I was wondering if there's like a tactic, or I guess it would be a tactic, right? Like where you kind of like take a knee and hide completely behind the shield as a line.
Yeah, this absolutely happens. First off, I know you're very new to our conventions, but we don't strike on or below the knee. So your feet being exposed in the SCA is irrelevant. So having a war shield like what you were seeing a couple weeks ago, my traditional war shield, I have my unit push. It's a 4 foot tall by 2 foot wide flat shield. I like those because they mesh the best with the most number of other shields. So if you don't have a lot of unit continuity on, hey, we've all got the same shield, it blends best with the most. So most common denominator is why you pick that for my unit. Yeah, so with a 4x2 shield, most anyone with a 4x2 should be able to lift it up and cover their head just enough that their knees are right down at the bottom of their shield. Of course, you're using your sword to defend the rest of your head. As far as kneeling, very regularly in bridge battles, there's a particular scenario, like, I mean, grounding your shields is what we refer to that as, is grounding them. There is actually a rule book for this, and I think we covered that a little bit in the war manual at one point. There's a proper, way to set your knees, spread with your shoulder sideways, so you're not got your shield in front of you and you're grounded, but it's actually to the side of you, so that you're leaning into it and you've got your knees spread out underneath you, and you can actually even drape your sword down your back to protect your back if they're throwing shots over you. Or you can literally stick your sword up against your shield and the ground and use it as a kick for your shield, your own sword, so that if you take a hard charge, they literally are pushing against the ground and not you.
I can testify. I did a melee practice with Ari at some point, and he taught me how to ground my shield for a charge. And just like a few weeks later, I was at Panhandle Skirmish, and this guy was charging up, and I grounded the shield, and he was laid on his ass. He was laughing his ass off. I was happy. We were having a good time, but I was very happy that I got that lesson.
So over the years, I'm going to touch on this briefly. This is going into a little bit more specific tactics for a specific scenario concerning bridge battles. Bridge battles, narrow lanes, anywhere from 9 feet wide, 18 foot wide. It really depends on which war you're at. But command for many years believed there was only one real way to fight a bridge battle, and that was rock, paper, scissors. So with that scenario, basically you've got your full closed shield wall, you've got your spears only, and then you've got your integrated spears and shields intermingled. That's your rock, your paper, and your scissors. So if you got a shield wall marching at you, that's just a big old shield wall. Well, your spears can't exactly work around that too well. So what do you throw up against that? Maybe the acrenolated shield with spears. So now you've got some defense, so your spearmen aren't getting walked over, but you've got spears integrated in so they can actually work against the shields and pick that shield wall apart. Well, if somebody presents the acrenolated wall with spears and shields mixed in, then, well, how do you beat that? Well, I bring more spears to that fight. I send all my spears up. So now I've got twice as many spears and half the shields I have to worry about because they're going to get cross shot like immediately by other spearmen. Well, okay, well, that blows. Well, how do you beat all spears? You send a full shield wall and run them down because, you just don't stop moving, you just run them over. That used to be the tactic that was the most popular I'd seen for bridge scenarios and command structure. I came up with another tactic that I like to call the meat grinder. It's rough, and it implements grounding your shields. So essentially, you can see on the screen here, this is a breach scenario, but it also serves for a bridge. You're going to have a single heavy shield wall up front. Second rank is going to be glaives and great weapons. Third rank is going to be spears. They're going to be forwarded to walk, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be in a hurry for this situation because it's going to work itself out shortly. As soon as first contact is made, when whatever's in front of your shield wall decides that they're going to run into your shield, unless it's all spears, and you're just going to keep walking through them until you hit shields. You walk through shield to shield contact. As soon as you get first shield to shield contact, your entire unit grounds and leans back a little bit. What ends up happening is your shield, when you ground and lean back, your opponent's shield is going to move forward, and they're going to hit your shield and they're going to lean forward because you have the lower center of gravity. And this flat tabled surface is now going to meet this other flat tabled surface. So you're leaning exposed forward and exposing the top and back of your head to now that second rank that is moved up with the glaives and pole arms. And they're just going to beat the tar out of those heads that are now exposed because you've got a grounded shield wall pushed up against a standing shield wall. That's not going to last very long because panic's going to ensue and they're going to try to withdraw. So it's right before you withdraw, and I mean, it could be just a few seconds. If they give you 10 seconds of that murder zone, man, that's a lot of killing that happens in 10 seconds. Your spears move up and pick them apart, which you're actually going to switch out your great weapons to your spears. The lines are just literally going to shift through each other. And your spears are going to pick off everything they can until they get out of range and are reformed. At that point, your spears back out, your pole arms come back up, you stand your shield wall back up, and you walk your shield wall forward until they contact the shield again. And then they ground, rinse and repeat. This tactic, pretty much every time I've used it, it's been successful. It's rough on your frontline soldiers. A lot of fighters don't like being on their knees like that. I did it for years. I mean, I've got 2 bad knees myself now, not from that, from other dumb things, but it's definitely rough on the body, but it's an efficient tactic. I'm been encouraging people to come up with a way to beat it for me because I want to see a scenario that beats that. Because
that would be it. Archers at your spears. Wouldn't
it can be really like bridge battles are weird because sometimes they use what they call covered bridges, which means you can only fire straight down the bridge. You can't fire over the sides of it because it's like it's a little house, just a tunnel. So that wouldn't fare well against this tactic because you've still got a full shield wall in front. And if you're taking archer rain, you're just going to stand up with those shields and they're not going to be able to shoot any of your poles. But if it's not a covered bridge, absolutely. Archers are problematic, especially when you start getting past the halfway point across the bridge. You start getting in the zone where the archers can start spreading out down the banks of the river and shooting at you from hard flanks, which is where your shields can't protect or can't quite so easily. But,
Is there like a position like a spotter that doesn't engage, that basically is just watching back behind the line to see what their next move is, to like call what your next move will be?
that's actually your upper level command. As when I was warlord, I set myself back there. Usually at Gulf Wars, there's 3 bridges. So I would usually set myself behind the center bridge so I could get a good view of all 3 of them. And then you've got your individual unit commanders set behind their individual bridges. Then there's another unit commander back with a reserve unit or 2 in the backfield that can be deployed as I saw fit. So we each have our zones that we're responsible for and can delineate those commands down the line. So yeah, when I'm in the warlord position, I should not be within the first 5 or 6 ranks of a bridge battle for any measure of time. In the ravine battles, I sat in the backfield so much, and I generally ran with sword and shield to help protect myself. It's the most defensive posture. But a ravine battle is very stagnant, and the position being so far behind the lines, no one really ever rushed me because I was just too far in the backfield. My only real concern was archers shooting at me. So how do you beat an archer? Become an archer. I would pick up a bow while I was commanding. So when I wasn't actively directing traffic or doing something, I can pop a shot off. So again, it depends on your scenario, but absolutely there is usually with your bigger battles, there's someone set up to be your spotter and do all those things that you asked about.
So we have these maneuvers in the manual. So let me ask the same question for each one. Why cup? Why would we use a cup?
Cups of death are generally used on portals and bridges. If you can imagine this cup that we're looking at here, the 2 shieldmen that are at the most left and most right, they're actually not at the edges like of the, say, bridge or breach. They're actually like a body width away from that, so that they're not exposed on their sides to spearmen or archers or any of that. The idea for the cup is you've got grounded shields or low sitting shields, like you take a single knee. It depends on how archer heavy they're firing at you, that can change. But you can see with this scenario, you've got spears in the second rank overlapping them. The idea of this is if a unit aggresses any certain point, is you don't want to stick your unit's head in that, you've got more points attacking you than are actually in your unit that you've stuck into that hole. So you're also getting assaulted from all the angles. So you're basically forcing yourself into double envelopment when you put your head into a cup of death from the attacker's perspective. And that's what those are designed to do. They are designed to cause high attrition for a limited access front. So
the second line of the cup, are they there for charges? If charges break through, they're there to support and take out anything that breaks the line?
Well, actually, for this situation, the spears right behind your shields is your second line. Everything in the backfield has got their own task. The markings for the glaives, if you'll hover over those, they're the ones that are there for your pulse charge or your column charge support. They will go to the point that's about to get hit by a unit moving fast, trying to punch through. They're going to move to that and execute pretty much that same tactic I described as a meat grinder. They're going to bolster up their shields so their shieldmen don't get run over, and they're going to rain down destruction from over the top so that they can suppress that charge. Your other units that you see in that situation here, there's lines of spearmen and there's lines of shieldmen in the backfield. Those are fillers. I've sat in a cup of death so long on certain battles that I was tired of spearing. I mean, I was just exhausted. So it was prudent for me to step out and let another spearman in. And those lines of spears and shields act as cartridges. When you die, we teach you in a melee, if you're that frontline shieldman, die and fall forward, get out of the line. What happens is you fall forward, you dress right. So the unit shifts, everyone shifts to the right to fill that gap that you just created. And the shieldmen on the left side that are in this column as reserve, they're the ones designated to fill in that end gap. They're only going to have to fill from one spot because everybody shifts right. We have tried in the past putting different pockets so you can fill more directly. It ended up just becoming more of a cluster because now you're trying to get several spearmen out of the way. You've got this already exposed gap that now you're weakening even more by pulling that pole support off of that gap that got created by that shieldman dying. And then you're trying to integrate a shield in between two different shields while under duress without really as much protection as you should have had when you did that. So having that uniform, everybody shifts right when the shieldman dies, and cartridge in from the left side of the line is what fixed that problem. It became more efficient. Yes, it could be moving 20 people in that cup, but those 20 people moving in an orderly fashion while protected by their poles ended up being more efficient.
When you say bolstering the line with the spearmen or the glademen, do you mean holding the spear like on their backs to press so that they have more support?
Yeah, that is a tactic that we commonly train with pole arms and great weapons. Basically, it adds another body to the pile of bodies that are about to collide from a pulse charge. Generally, I'm going to throw this out there. The biggest safety precaution I can say if you're a poleman executing this maneuver is do not set this at the shoulders, neck, or head. I don't even recommend you doing that mid-spine or even lower back. You want this right about the hips. Lowest center of gravity always wins. And even when you're supporting someone in front of you, if you're supporting them at the hips, somebody's going to be smashing them into your spear or glaive. So your kidneys have got armor on it that helps that. The hips are generally where most of the force is going to be transferred from their upper body, which is where their shields are, to the ground through their legs. So supporting that point actually gives them the highest chances and best support from behind than maybe doing it up higher, because they could get pushed underneath your spear and that just gets terribly ugly. And it's also better for your own people to not get injured from that maneuver.
So here I see file. I've heard the word column used. Why would we use a file or a column?
You see columns very regularly used for column charges. We described a cup of death earlier, and one of the basically the only ways to get through that is to sacrifice someone to break that cup open somewhere so that you're prepared to flood through that one little gap. That's usually accomplished by using a column charge like you see here. A column charge is a file. So the difference between a line and a column is the direction you're facing. So in a line, everyone's got their shields together and facing the, to the left technically, because if you're a righty looking over your shield, it's the shield's on your left arm. A column is a shield is turned comfortably in front of you, but you're all facing the same direction. So your cartridge like bullets in a magazine. That can change depending upon your needs. Like you see in the example here, all the shields are faced forward. There are certain maneuvers like the bubble maneuver where you actually turn your shields back to the line formation side and you get closer than close to each other and push your way through. So that's really the difference between the file and your line. A line is basically shields facing one direction and everybody facing that direction. File is just a 90-degree turn from that.
Hafton, you have a question?
Yeah, so while we're talking about columns, you've also mentioned pulse charges a couple times. So column charge and pulse charge, are those just the same thing or is there a difference there?
No, yeah, you caught me. No, they're not the same. Pulse charges, I'm going to start with column. Column charges are basically like that sacrificial lamb I talked about with a cup of death. You're sending a unit, their intention is to go through or die. Their job is to blast through and just keep going. That would be your traditional column charge. A pulse charge, however, would be done with a smaller unit. And I mean, it could be as little as one person. It's 1, 2, maybe 3, really depends on your situation. What they're going to do is they're going to jump across no man's land, and they're going to make that little charge up to the enemy unit. They're going to pulse out. They're going to do damage, like kill a spearman, kill an archer, and then they're going to come back. And they're going to keep doing this little pulsing. They're going to run in, do some damage, pull out, get behind the main line, maybe shift over a few persons down the line, and then pulse out and do it again. Again, it's a smaller person, 1 or 2 people's charge, and they're intended to come back because you don't want them to get heavily engaged. But the idea is they're probably not, because they're literally throwing themselves into harm's way and getting outnumbered from all angles to execute whatever mission they're trying to execute. So
they're really trying to disrupt the line.
yeah, we use pulse charges like that to expound on small pockets of weakness. Like you really don't try to get your newer fighters to do it. It needs to be somebody that's quick on their feet and aggressive, not a big war shield necessarily, but it can be, depends again on the situation. But they're going to expand on, like, hey, there's this hot duke over there with a spear that our archers just can't shoot because they've got some other hot duke with a shield protecting them. So guess what? We're going to send some hot squire over there to run up and just smoke them out real quick if they can and come back, because we got to neutralize that threat. And it might be worth sacrificing a hot squire to do so in a pulse charge, or several, because your hot spearmen and good archers in the right locations can definitely change the whole outcome of a battle.
In one of our recent sessions, we talked about the phalanx and how the phalanx is a good way of breaking this cup by focusing the charge on one of the corners, and then making a cup inside their line to protect.
That's what we call the bubble. And I think there is actually a graphic for the bubble. It may be down at the end of the handbook. I can't tell you exactly right now, but yeah, the idea is you're facing this cup of death, and you're going to take this file like you see just below it, except it's only going to be one line instead of two. Your front person is pretty much going to have their shield forward, and everyone behind them is going to have their shield literally overlapping the person in front of them. So you're covering the side of the person in front of you. And low stance, low center of gravity, swords overhead. I mean, you're getting as low as you can possibly move as a unit, because you're actually going to get hip to hip and push each other as you're going. So it's a slow crawl of a line that hits that far. When you're aggressing it, it's going to be the right side of the wall. But as we're looking at that cup there, it's going to be the far left point. And you're going to hug the wall, and you're going to hit that person on that left point, push them through with your mass of everyone pushing on each other, so that you can creep down that wall on one edge. And then once you get to a certain point where all your shields are in, and just not all of them are in, but 1 or 2 maybe still inside that cup of death, so that when y'all push forward and create that bubble and that gap in between the wall and the army, for all your pole arms and or your support crew to start running in through that gap, that they're still being protected as they're going through that breach. It's probably the most successful method I've seen of breaching a cup like this. And I mean, you have to focus on one point to break a cup. And strategically, with most of our shieldmen being right-handed, that is the point that you can exert the most defensive posture against, to get to weather the storm, to break it enough. But that is using a single column or a file.
Sosha, you got some comment? You're muted, brother.
Button here. There we go. Yeah, the phalanx is not the bubble. The bubble is a single file that's pushing forward and using the wall to protect your right side and your shields to protect your left. And it squeezes in through the side and then it bubbles out so you can get your pole arms and stuff behind them, and it breaks. There's a good diagram that Ari drew that's further down in the book. So that's different. A phalanx is like the ancient Greeks used. We used it around the year 2000, 2003, 2004. And it was actually a 5x5 block, where it could be deeper than that. It could be 5 wide and 8 or 10 deep. And everybody's pushing the guy in front of him, like Ari said. You're putting your shield in the small of his back down low, and you're pushing him forward and up. And the front row of the phalanx actually leans backwards on the people behind him, and they don't push. They get pushed up and over the enemy kneeling shield wall, and it'll crash in. We used it very successfully 2 times on gates at Gulf Wars, and we used it at Penzic very successfully. And they didn't know how to stop it, because you can't stop it with 2 or 3 guys deep, because we're 5 or 6 or 7 deep, and it will just push right on through. And your front guys don't die because they don't fall over. But it takes, we did 3 full War College weekends. 4 War College weekends every year in order to develop that. So it takes a lot to develop phalanx. I don't think anybody's used it since then. The bubble can be taught fairly quickly, and as long as everybody's very, very disciplined, Ari's right. It's the best way to break a shield wall. Yeah, okay, there's your diagram there.
Yeah, and just like Josiah is talking about, the biggest part of this is your unit has to train to do this. Bubble is a little bit easier to train than a phalanx, but it requires a larger number of people. So it's harder to train because most of your groups are training less than 10 people at their practices. You can do walkthroughs, yes, but doing it under duress is a little harder to do. That's where your local areas, if you're trying to train your melees, whatever kingdom you're at, if you can encourage your kingdom to do a weekend training scenario where the majority of your kingdom comes together to train melees, that's going to be your best bet for raising the unit levels to a point where the command structure, your upper level command, can actually utilize a lot of the tactics they know just from experience and teaching to maximize our efficiency on the battlefield. My largest frustration is that our average unit can't accomplish a lot of stuff that's in my head on a field battle because we just can't accomplish, basic tactics. So if you can encourage your local groups to train and get to the level where you can execute these, that's going to help your kingdom immensely in the long run.
So like locally we have the village fair coming up, and I know there's like some tournaments and stuff like that scheduled, but I didn't see anything as far as like war strategy or melee practice, I guess you would call it, on the schedule. Is that something that like we should adding?
Actually, we'd be re-adding it. At Trimaris, culturally, in between 2000 and 2010, every event was a tournament and a melee afterwards. We used to, at that point, have monthly war colleges and practices every month, same location, whole kingdom would show up. So we've addressed, as the Shiv of Trimaris, the issue that we've kind of gotten away from that over the years. And now we're starting to see at our kingdom level events, we're implementing one less tournament so we can do melees in the afternoons again, like we used to. But literally, this just started within the last year.
Shameless
Again.
plug, we have Duke U is going to be at Baronial Bash. And in the second half, Duke U is focused entirely on melee and training for melee. That's the first weekend of November. And Tampa is Wyvernwood. And so that's the first weekend of November. The second weekend is Crown List. So that's I believe the next kingdom level. I know Sir Surshai is planning on scheduling a few private melee training in the coming months as well. I'm sure that'll be announced. Halfdan, did you have a question?
Actually, I just had a comment. When I was looking over the village fair schedule, I'm pretty sure I saw melees on there at 3 p.m. on Saturday. So I do think that they're intending to have melee at village fair as well.
So Shai, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, and I think Ari will probably back me up on this. We're having melee practices now, but it's melee practices like going to your local practice to practice individual fighting and never doing any slow work, never doing any drills, never doing any pel work. Oh, we'll just fight a lot and that'll make us better. And that can improve you just a little bit, but you've got to practice the melee with equivalent of slow work, which is the walkthroughs. And you just, it's like trying to, I want to win crown tourney, but I don't want to do any pel work and I don't want to do any slow work. You're not going to get there. So we have started meleeing again, and that's great. But so far at the last event, Kingdom event, Coronation, we had a melee practice with 20 guys or more, but they would not do any drills, would not do any slow work. So we're very, very limited if we don't do that.
No, yeah, I totally agree with you, Shosai. And it really turns into a cultural thing. Different kingdoms probably have different pulses on that. This is just Trimaris and the phases we've been going through. Like I mentioned, between 2000 2010, we were really heavily doing melees regularly and vehemently. Well, that was because at Trimaris, we are kind of like the Scottish clans. At least back then, the heads of the households had grudges with each other. So those of us that reported to them, we would show up and just go kick the crap out of each other after the tournaments. So we had a culture, even though the peers weren't quite getting along, at least on the nights, but that also spurred the culture of, hey, let's do unit combat, because
I agree totally.
and the reason why I did
there
it
was a
is-
huge
yeah, go ahead.
huge rivalry between the big households.
And
Back then there was Osgard and Goldstar and Duntier and Blacksword, and later on Cerebus joined in. And there was this big, huge competition as to who could do the best, which made us drill when we weren't at, at the event.
because we
Because
didn't
if you don't
kicked
win,
at the event,
you want to win, exactly.
but what ended up happening was the heads of those households got old, stopped showing up. The people in those households became peers themselves, and all those grudges kind of faded off over the years. I mean, they may still hold those grudges, but the households and the units don't hold those grudges like they used to. So the desire to go stomp each other after the tournaments was lost. So it kind of went for the wayside for many years. And one of the biggest things that we combat in the SCA, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, is convincing people to train melee, because nobody likes to train. We just want to go do. And it's easier at events to get 40 people, 50 people to go melee and just go do melees as opposed to train melees. So we're trying, as the knights of our kingdoms and heads of our households in Trimaris, we're trying to promote individual training with households and having an open venue. Shosai has been running, regional practices for the venues for people where they're not knights in the area that are doing those, so that the individual like yourself, Tim, if you're interested in doing melees, we're going to find a place for you to get training at this point. And you just really just got to reach out and have the desire to do so. And sadly, that's probably one of the biggest flaws, is that overall SCA wide is the desire to just train, because it's boring.
So back to the formations. The next one we have is wedge. Why wedge?
Because you want to put a hole in something, just like splitting wood. You've got an objective on the other side of a barrier, and you got to get through that. So the wedge formation is one of the strongest ways to do that. Just like physics, if you've got, and the way I described a wedge earlier, with lefties all on the right side of the line and righties on the other side of the line, in a perfect world, there would be enough lefties in a battle to actually accomplish a full wedge. There's just not. I have my own household. I field probably 10 to 12 people at full strength, and 2 of those are lefties. So I can't really build a wedge with 2 lefties. In medieval times, the Romans very regularly would make people put their shields in the left hands to accomplish a proper wedge. We're a volunteer organization. Not a lot of people are going to be willing to do that. So we're kind of limited on what I would call a proper wedge. But the principle is still the same. You've got a single point that's being bolstered by all the other points leading to it. So you're going to take that one point, you're going to ram it through where you want to break that hole through, and all the support elements in the backfield. Once you open up that gap in the line, they're going to flood through and do the actual damage to that unit, so you can accomplish whatever objective is on the other side of that line. So that's what wedges are really good for.
I don't know if we have an image for it, but can you talk a little bit about a hedgehog?
Oh, the hedgehog. I mean, I can.
Very, very temporary. It
Yeah.
lasts about 8 seconds.
So
And then you break it.
yeah, it's pretty much a hedgehog of doom. It depends on when you. I've never seen a hedgehog actually. Well, I take that back. I have seen one hedgehog in my time in the SCA, and it was, I think, around one of the war tanks that North Shield brought to the battlefield, which was octagonal, and I think it was about 12 foot wide. But yeah, so the idea, there's the aggressive wedge, and there's the aggressive hedgehog and the defensive hedgehog. The aggressive hedgehog is the unit goes out with the intention to form a hedgehog and get surrounded so that they can be this shiny goat that units go to jump on. It's highly defensive because essentially you've got grounded shields or even standing shields overlapping sometimes with a second rank of shields back over them with spears intermixed. So you've got this spiny little, very protective structure, limited on its ability to actually be aggressive. It's built to be defensive, but it's hard to be aggressive in a circle in a unit because you can't exactly move. You can, it's just very inefficient. So most of your hedgehogs are designed to be stationary. I know hedgehogs were trained historically, basically as a defensive posture. It's like, ah, crap, we just got flanked by actual cavalry, but we're engaged with infantry in front of us, so we're pretty much screwed. Let's just form a hedgehog and fight till we die. So that's my take on the hedgehog. Part of the reason why I don't train the hedgehog is we're not fighting to the death. This is reenacting. And, you know, if we're going to fight to the last man for a scenario, well, we get to get up and do the next scenario afterwards. So just go die, run gloriously, and go maybe kill 1 or 2 people and get it over with. Because if you're at the point where your unit is entirely surrounded and needing to go back to defend each other, that scenario is probably already lost. And a hedgehog's not going to bring you out of it.
Captain, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was going to ask about perhaps the viability of it around specific objective points, though, not as the last stand for one side, but rather to maintain a hut, for instance.
I mean, like with the ravine scenarios, yeah, at Gulf Wars, there's usually a single post that's got a flag. A hedgehog-like formation or a reverse cup gets utilized fairly regularly for that. It's not a full hedgehog because generally they're not getting flanked deep enough to be encompassed, but they do sometimes. But that's only going to be like a 5-6 person hedgehog that's leaning their shields and backs up against a 4x4 that's sunk into the ground. I mean, I guess you could call that a hedgehog, but without the spear portions of the program that actually make it spiny like a hedgehog, it's not really a hedgehog. It's just a bunch of people with their backs up against a wall. But
Really, the only value that I've heard a hedgehog use is when we're regrouping. just for a brief moment, the group, Trimaris regroup, you're behind the line, so bring everybody together and hedgehog just for a moment and reform the line and organize.
Absolutely. If you're reforming after a big swirl on the battlefield and you may not have your bearings on where the enemy is all around you or not, sure, a loose hedgehog formation would definitely be advantageous for the brief period of time it takes for somebody to take command, get their bearings, and reorganize the line into something more efficient.
So Shai?
I was going to say, I've never actually fought in a hedgehog that was the fighting things that the traditional historical ones were. We've always used it as a regroup. It's just our standard regiment practice that all of my guys yelled regroup and ran to a spot. I'd hold up my weapon. They'd all gather around me. And usually before they all even got there, I would have decided what I was going to do. And I'd be yelling form line and pointing in a direction, and they'd go. But they just knew if they didn't know what to do, they ran to me and faced outward until they heard the command and they looked and saw where it was. So like I said, it usually lasted about 8 seconds max, and then we were moving again. I have seen Callantyr use a hedgehog once in a battle at Penzik, 88, 89, 90, somewhere around in there. But it didn't kill a lot of people, because what they did, the group, I think it was East Kingdom, was facing against them. They killed everybody outside the circle and ignored the circle until they got everybody. And then they came and concentrated all their forces on Callantyr, who had like 80 or 100 guys. And now they had 300 or 400 attacking them. So it wasn't very effective. I mean, they stayed alive for a long time, but they didn't kill very many. So I don't see a lot of use for it in SCA combat, other than as a very brief regroup so everybody can hear you and you yell and you go straight to a line or whatever you call them or whatever you're going to use.
So we've talked a lot in the past few months about winging left, winging right, flanking an army. We haven't talked a lot about refusing and the mechanics of how to refuse a flank. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As you can see on the diagram right here, a refuse is essentially a wheel, but in reverse. So instead of moving forward to wheel left or right, you're turning backwards. You're walking backwards, and the same mechanics, the pivot person moves very slowly, pivots very slowly. The person at the far end of the line almost has to trot. Doing refuses, you can't move any faster than just a slow walk because you're walking backwards. So this would be useful if you don't have a wing unit or a Harrier squad attached to your unit and you're getting flanked. So you have to suppress this flank. If you don't address this flank, your unit's dead. So as you can see in the diagram there, only half of that unit is doing the refuse because, they're being approached by a 5-person front. So you really only have to move 5 or 6 people to address that safely, because you're probably engaged on the front side of your line as well. And you don't want to turn your entire unit off of that line. So refuses are usually done very specifically. Your sub commander is going to be right up on your line. They're going to go, okay, everybody to the right of my voice or to the right of Sam here, and it's going to refuse the right. And that means there's something coming from the right. So you're going to swivel back to the left. You see there, they could be used more often. We do get the opportunity for flanks in a lot of our scenarios, but it's really based on your sub commanders and your unit commanders having their heads on the swivel, like we talked about earlier, and being able to go up to their unit and give those commands for them to know how to execute it. Most your baseline fighters, if you tell them, hey, refuse the right, they're going to look to the right, but not know exactly what they're supposed to do. So again, doing that unit training, getting that common verbiage down so that everyone in your kingdom uses the same vocabulary is crucial to making one of these very useful tactics
Communication
viable.
is key. That's the big message I'm hearing.
No doubt.
So we have just a few more minutes left before you wrap for the night. Ari, do you have any final thoughts that you want us to leave with in our or a summary of what we've talked about today?
Yeah, don't be afraid to train. You can't melee alone. So if whatever kingdom you're from, whatever area you're at, you don't have to wait for chivalry or knights or even veteran squires to decide that meleeing is what you want to do. If you've got the inkling, you go to your local practices and they're not practicing regularly, like talk to your marshal, go, hey, do you mind if once a month we do some training? Open your mouth. Don't be afraid to encourage others to train with you to melee. Because what you may find is some of the other newer fighters in your areas, or even some of your old shiv that, come out of the woodwork. So they're like, oh crap, people are meleeing. Cool. I'm going to show up for that because, as I said at the beginning, I probably wouldn't have stuck with fighting in the SCA if it wasn't for the melees, because that's really where my heart is. So I know there's got to be plenty of us out there to do it. So just don't be afraid to open your mouth and train.
So Shai, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think Ari and I are on the same page. You just got to train. I would love to see 3 or 4 big melee groups. It wouldn't even have maybe a 12-man household combined with a 10-man household and make 20 guys that train together and go out and start kicking people's butt and call out other households and say, hey, we want to meet you at such and such in melee, and trash them because you've drilled and they haven't. And then they will get the idea, well, to compete, I have to go out and learn how to do this. So we've got to train together. And they would put together a unit of 20 guys and go to meet Ari's unit and say, hey, let's do that. It's just, you got to have, it's like you go to a tournament and you're all pumped up. Oh man, I'm feeling really good. I'm going to go win crown or win champion of Trimaris. And you don't know how to block a wrap yet because you've never drilled how to move your sword to get it behind your head so you keep from getting hit. So everybody comes up against you, wraps you, and you get beat. And you're like, oh man, why can't I learn that? Well, because you haven't drilled. And all these knights walking around that they've done pell work, they've done slow work, so they could learn to fight individually really, really well. But they haven't practiced with their household to make their household good. They'll teach them pell work and they'll teach them drills to learn individual combat, but they won't do it with melee combat. And it is very frustrating. And the only thing that really got it before was the households started doing it to beat the Scots Welsh were the first one. Was Llewellyn challenged me and my guys, and his guys were much better fighters, but our guys had trained together and we trashed him on that first one. And then he started training and we were both fighting much better than in melees. And then Osgard and Duntier were like, oh, well, we got to train. And they started training and it just spread from there. And so by the time Ari came along, 2000 or whatever, he was seeing it. And it's like, okay, we had that tradition going. And it was rivalries. And they did talk some trash. I don't think they really hated each other, but they did talk some trash. So, but yeah, you got to train it or you're not going to be able to do it.
Tim, I saw your actual hand up.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask, like, let's say if I go to the Red Bug fighter practice tomorrow, is there like a game or something that you could play between, like a 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 for like a small group that you can still practice some of these tactics, but still kind of like have some kind of like objective besides just killing everybody?
I am not entirely certain. The only small unit games, melee games, I mean, other than just training and fighting in triads, is dog ball, and it's like a 10-person game, and it absolutely is just kicking each other's butts, not necessarily a unit fighting scenario, even though you could apply unit tactics to it. But It's
I
hard to
think-
get people to play that
I
game anymore.
think Tim is challenging us to come up with,
Like
uh,
a cap flag or something?
yeah, I think it's something we need to consider, trying to come up with some games that would inspire us to work as a unit, as a team with our training to be able to achieve a goal. So maybe we can, put our heads together and come up with something.
That'd be awesome.
I'll see what I can come up with.
All right, well, thank you, Jarl Ari and all for joining us tonight. It has been enlightening, and I look forward to the next one that we have coming next month. We'll have Sir Almeric leading the discussion. And also, again, in September, we have the Duke U and the Barony of Wyvernwood, where we're going to have actual training focused for melee. So I look forward to seeing everybody there.